The forest road between Ashinvale and the town of Durnwick was not a kind road. It didn't curve gently through meadows the way the southern roads did. It didn't have stone markers every mile, or inns with warm yellow lights spilling from their windows. The Ashinvale Road was a thin, muddy scar through ancient woods, and the trees on either side of it stood so tall and so close together that even at midday the light came through in thin silver needles, cold and distant. On an evening in late autumn, when the last of the leaves had finally surrendered to the wind, two figures moved along this road. The first was a boy. He looked about 15, though if you knew anything about elves, and most humans in Durnwick did not, you would know that he was closer to 40. But he had a young face, thin and pale as birchwood, with large gray eyes that had seen too much in recent weeks and not enough food in recent days. His ears came to soft points, half hidden beneath a tangle of dark hair. He wore a coat that had once been fine, deep forest green with brass buttons, but was now torn at the left shoulder and caked with dried mud along the hem. His name was Solen. He walked with one arm extended slightly behind him, and the reason for this was the second figure, an old woman. She was his grandmother. Her name was Maren, and she was, even by elf standards, extraordinarily old. Her back curved like a question mark. Her white hair was pinned up with two carved wooden sticks that had been her mother's. She walked slowly, each step deliberate, her left hand gripping Solen's outstretched arm. In her right hand, she carried a walking stick cut from ash wood. It was the only thing they had brought from their home that still worked properly. Everything else, their wagon, their horse, their trunk of belongings, was somewhere behind them, submerged in a river crossing that had gone wrong 3 days ago. How far? Maren asked. Her voice was thin but steady. It always sounded like a teacher's voice, even now. The town should be before midnight, Solen said. If the road holds. If. It will. She didn't answer. She knew when her grandson was lying to comfort her, and she had long ago decided to allow him the small kindness of it. They walked. The sky above the treetops went from gray to deep purple to the particular kind of black that meant real night. Not dusk pretending, but true darkness, with stars beginning to scratch through. The temperature dropped sharply. Solen could see his breath. He could feel his grandmother's grip on his arm tightening, not in fear, but because her joints ached in the cold and she needed more support. He did not say anything about this. What he said was, "There's a light." It was not a big light. It was the amber glow of a lantern, visible through the trees, perhaps 200 feet off the road. As they drew closer, the trees thinned, and Solen could make out the shape of a farmhouse. It was solidly built, a real structure, not a shepherd's hut, with a stone chimney from which smoke rose in a pale thread against the night sky. Behind it, the dark shapes of a barn and a small stable. A fence. A garden gone to winter stubble. Light in 2 windows. Someone was home. Solen stopped walking. His grandmother stopped with him. "No," she said, reading his thoughts. She was good at that. "Grandmother, we don't beg from humans. We wouldn't be begging. We'd be asking. There's a difference. They'll see what we are," she said. "And then it won't matter what we ask. They'll send us back to the road." Solen looked at her. He looked at the way she was leaning on the stick. He looked at the thin fabric of her coat and thought about how the temperature was still dropping and how Durnwick was, in truth, probably not reachable before midnight, and how the road was full of roots and ruts that were invisible in darkness, and how she was old. She was so old, and he was responsible for her. He looked back at the farmhouse. "Let me try," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "Then, don't grovel." "I won't. And don't lie about what we are. If they find out later, it'll be worse." "I know. And Solen, grandmother." He squeezed her hand gently. "Let me try." The man who opened the door was not what Solen expected. He had been bracing himself for suspicion. The narrowed eyes, the hand gripping the door frame, the quick up and down look that humans sometimes gave elves. He had rehearsed how he would keep his voice steady, how he would not apologize for existing. But the man who appeared in the doorway was simply tired. He was perhaps 50, broad-shouldered, with the kind of hands that had been calloused by decades of work until they looked almost like a different material than skin. His face was weathered and kind in the way that some faces get when the person has spent a lot of time outdoors and a lot of time alone with their own thoughts. He had gray in his beard and darker gray beneath his eyes. He looked at Solen. He looked past Solen to where Maren stood at the gate, leaning on her stick. He looked at Solen again, at the torn coat, the mud, the bare hands red with cold. "What happened to you?" he said. It was not an unfriendly question. It was the question of someone who saw that something had gone wrong and wanted to understand it. "We lost our wagon crossing the Fenner River," Solen said. 3 days ago. We've been walking since." The man absorbed this. "The Fenner? That crossing floods this time of year." "We didn't know. Where are you headed?" "Dernwick. My grandmother has family there." Solen paused. "Sir, I want to ask you something, and I want to ask it honestly." The man's eyebrows rose slightly. He folded his arms, not in a hostile way, but in the way of someone settling in to listen. "We need somewhere to sleep tonight," Solen said. "Not your house, if that's too much. The barn, if you have one, even a corner of it. I saw you have a stable. We wouldn't disturb anything. We'd leave before you're up in the morning. I can't pay you right now. Everything we had went into the river, but I can work. Tomorrow morning, whatever you need done, before we leave. I'm telling you plainly what I'm asking, and I'm telling you plainly what I can offer." He stopped. The man looked at him for a long moment. "You're an elf?" he said. "Yes." "Both of you?" "Yes." Silence. Solen held the man's gaze because his grandmother had told him not to grovel, and looking away would have felt like groveling. "My name is Aldric," the man said at last. "Come inside." Maren did not want to come inside. She stood in the doorway and looked at the farmhouse interior with the expression she usually reserved for things she was assessing for traps. The main room was a kitchen and sitting room combined, a large hearth with a proper fire going, a wooden table with 2 chairs, shelves of crockery, braided rugs on the stone floor, a cat asleep on a windowsill who opened one eye and then closed it again, unimpressed. "You can sit by the fire," Aldric said. He said it directly to her, not to Solen, which Solen noted and was grateful for. Maren looked at the fire. Then she stepped inside. She moved to the chair closest to the hearth and lowered herself into it with the careful deliberateness of someone who had learned to make every movement count. She held her hands toward the flame and was quiet. Aldric moved to the kitchen area without ceremony. He put a pot on. He cut bread. He didn't make a fuss of it, didn't announce what he was doing, just did it. Solen stood near the door, not sure where to put himself. "Sit," Aldric said, without looking up. Solen sat. "You said 3 days," Aldric said, still at the stove. "What did you eat?" "We found a farmstead abandoned on the 2nd day. There were turnips in the cellar. We took 6. I left a note." Aldric glanced at him then. "A note? With my name and what we took and that we'd send payment. I don't know if anyone will ever read it, but—" Solen lifted one shoulder. It felt important. Aldric was quiet for a moment. Then he turned back to the stove. He put out 3 bowls of soup. A thick potato and herb soup that was so warm and so filling that Solen had to remind himself not to eat too fast. There was bread. There was butter. There was, for Maren, a small cup of something hot and slightly sweet that Aldric said was made from dried elderberries. "For joints," he said simply. Maren looked at him over the rim of the cup. Her gray eyes, darker than Solen's and considerably more penetrating, studied him the way she might study a text she hadn't encountered before. "You know elf physiology," she said. "I know old people in winter," Aldric replied. "My mother had the same trouble." Maren considered this. Then she drank. For a while, no one spoke much. The fire crackled. The cat relocated from the windowsill to the rug near the hearth. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the shutters with a sound that made the warmth inside feel more pronounced by contrast. Eventually, Aldric said, "Where are you from?" "Before Dernwick, I mean." "Velarath," Solen said. A pause. "That's north." "Yes." Aldric didn't ask more, but there was a question in his silence that was easy to read. Velarath was far north. It was elf country. And they were here, on a road in late autumn, without a wagon or a horse or money, trying to reach a small human town. Solen looked at his grandmother. She gave him a slight nod. "There was trouble," Solen said. "In the summer. Political trouble. You may have heard," he paused. "Maybe not. It doesn't always travel far, news from the north." "I heard something," Aldric said carefully, "about the Velarath Council. The new magistrate." Solen's voice was neutral in the way that took effort. He issued a land decree. Certain families were required to vacate their properties within 60 days. For civic reorganization. That was what they called it. And your family was one of them. My grandmother's family. She owned land there for 200 years. Solen looked at the fire. The house is gone now. The land has been reassigned. Maren made no sound. She sat with her cup in both hands and her eyes on the middle distance, and her face was very still. Aldric was quiet for what felt like a long time. "And you're going to Dernwick," he said. "My grandmother has a cousin there. We haven't seen her in a long time, but she wrote to us. When things started to go wrong, she wrote to say there was room." "Good," Aldric said. "Just that. Good." As if it was the right thing to hear, and he was glad it existed. Then he stood up and cleared the bowls without making anyone feel like a burden. Aldric showed them where they would sleep. He had a spare room, small, with a narrow bed and a wooden cot folded against the wall. He unfolded the cot and put blankets on it without being asked. The blankets were heavy wool, faintly smelling of cedar. "The bed is for you," he said to Maren. "The boy needs rest too," she said. "The boy is young. He'll be fine on the cot." Aldric looked at Solen briefly. "No offense." "None taken," Solen said. Maren allowed herself to be settled into the bed, a process she permitted with minimum fuss and maximum dignity. And then she looked at Aldric, who was setting a candle on the small table. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. The question was direct. It wasn't suspicious or challenging. It was Maren's genuine desire to understand a thing. Aldric set the candle down. He thought about the question honestly, as a person does when they're not going to offer a pretty answer, but a true one. "I had a daughter," he said. "She moved away. Far away. I think about her on roads sometimes. Whether she's warm." He straightened. "That's most of it." Maren looked at him for a moment. "Thank you," she said. It was the first time, Solen realized, that he had ever heard his grandmother thank a human for anything. It was a strange and significant sound. "Sleep," Aldric said. "I'll be up by 5. You don't have to be." He took the candle and pulled the door almost closed, leaving just a slice of warm light from the hallway. Solen lay on the cot in the dark and listened to his grandmother breathe. When her breathing evened out and slowed, he let himself do something he hadn't allowed on the road. He thought about the house in Velarath, not the loss of it. He'd been working hard not to think about that, because thinking about it too much made it hard to keep moving, and he needed to keep moving. But the house itself, the shape of it, the garden his grandmother had kept for as long as he could remember, the winter vegetables, the old apple tree at the corner whose limbs had grown over the fence and into the neighbor's yard so gradually that neither neighbor had ever minded. The kitchen where she'd taught him to read, using old botanical texts because those were what she had. The way the light came through the east window in the morning. He pressed his eyes shut and let himself remember it all once, carefully, like something he was storing away safely. Then he put it somewhere protected and let it rest. Outside, the wind pushed at the shutters. The house held. He slept. He was awake before 5. Old habit from Velarath, where the household had always risen early. He lay still for a moment, heard his grandmother still sleeping, then quietly folded his blanket, smoothed the cot, and slipped out of the room. The kitchen was dim, the fire banked low, the cat once again on the windowsill. Solen moved carefully, not wanting to wake Aldric. He found wood stacked by the hearth and added 3 pieces, working the fire back up. He found a broom in the corner and swept the kitchen floor, which needed it. He found the bucket by the door and went out into the pre-dawn darkness to the well he'd seen the night before. The cold outside was sharp and clarifying. The stars were still out, just barely, the sky beginning to lighten at its eastern edge. The farmyard was peaceful. The chickens in their coop were stirring. The single cow in the stable made a low sound as he passed. He drew water. He carried it back. He filled the kettle and put it on. He had found oats on the shelf and was trying to remember what he'd seen his grandmother do with oats when he heard footsteps on the stairs. Aldric appeared in the kitchen doorway. He stopped. He looked at the swept floor, the fire, the kettle, the oats in Solen's hands. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I said I could work," Solen replied. "I meant it. I don't know where everything is. Can you show me what else needs doing before we leave?" Aldric looked at him for another moment. Then he almost smiled. Not a big smile, just a shift around the eyes and corners of the mouth. "Chickens need feeding," he said. "After that, there's fence posts that need resetting along the north side. Ground is still workable if you catch it before it freezes hard. Show me." They worked together through the early morning, not talking much, but not in an uncomfortable way. Solen learned quickly, followed instructions well, and worked without complaint or comment in the cold that made his fingers ache. Aldric showed him the fence posts. 3 of them had tilted after a wet autumn, and they reset them together, Solen holding while Aldric packed the earth. When the sun was fully up, they went back inside. Maren was awake and had, to Solen's mild alarm, already made tea. She was sitting at the table with 3 cups already poured, her walking stick hooked over the chair, her hair repinned with the 2 carved sticks, her coat, still muddy, but she had done something about the hem, draped over the back of the chair. She looked at them both when they came in. "Sit," she said. They sat. She pushed cups toward them. Solen wrapped his cold hands around his, and felt the warmth move through his palms like something he'd nearly forgotten was possible. Over breakfast, eggs from the chickens, bread from the day before, the last of the elderberry drink from Maren, a different kind of conversation happened. Not the careful, necessary conversation of the night before, but something easier. Maren asked Aldric about the farm, and he told her. He'd built it himself, mostly, over 20 years. He'd had a wife. She had died 7 years ago. A fever, 2 weeks, very fast. The daughter was real, as he'd mentioned. She was in a city to the south, married, 2 children. She wrote regularly. He visited when the farm allowed. It doesn't always allow, he said. No, Maren agreed. The land is demanding. You farm. Gardens. Not fields. Her eyes went somewhere briefly. I had a very large garden. He nodded. He didn't ask about it. He just nodded, as if he understood that a garden could be a very serious thing. Solen watched them. He watched the way his grandmother, who was not, by any definition, an easy person to talk to, who had been a scholar and a landowner and an administrator and who had opinions on nearly everything and the education to back them up, talked with this man, this human woodcutter farmer who had, as far as Solen could tell, a very limited formal education and a very large store of practical knowledge and a quality that was harder to name. Decency, maybe, or something older than that word. The thing that decency comes from, before it gets a name. You could stop here longer, Aldric said at one point. Not pressuring, just making space for the possibility. If you needed to rest more than one night. You're very generous, Maren said. I have the room. We have people waiting in Dernwick, Maren said. And we've already taken more than we planned to. The fence posts were worth more than the soup, Aldric said. He said it practically, as a man who kept honest accounts. We'll say it was equal and leave it at that, Maren replied. He almost smiled again. She almost smiled back. It was a very old-fashioned kind of exchange, and Solen found, unexpectedly, that it made his throat feel tight. They left after breakfast. Aldric had, while Solen was washing the dishes over the boys' protests, wrapped something in cloth and put it in a small canvas bag. He handed it to Solen at the door. Bread, he said, and dried apple. There's a bit of hard cheese, too. For the road. Solen held the bag. He didn't know what to say. He'd thought he did. He'd been composing thank yous in his head since he woke up. But standing here with the bag in his hands, he found that the words he'd prepared felt too small for the thing they were supposed to carry. When we get to Dernwick, he said finally, I'll send you something. Properly. You don't need to. I'm going to. He met Aldric's eyes. Thank you. Not just for the bed and the food. For he stopped. For opening the door. Aldric looked at him steadily. You asked honestly, he said. That makes it easier. Maren said goodbye differently. She stood before Aldric with her walking stick and her pinned-up hair and her muddy coat, and she looked at him the way she'd looked at him the night before, assessing, thorough, her scholar's eyes reading more than most people showed. Then she reached into the pocket of her coat and took something out. It was small, a brooch, silver, in the shape of a leaf, with a small green stone at its center. Even with the coating of journey grime it had on it, Solen recognized it. It was very old. It had been his grandmother's mother's. Grandmother, he started. She held up one finger. He stopped. She held the brooch out to Aldric. He looked at it, and then at her, and he shook his head slightly. I don't want payment. It's not payment, she said. It's different from payment. Payment is for services. This is, she paused. I have been carrying this for a long time. It is old, and I am old, and I want to know it went somewhere that has warmth in it. She looked at him directly. You have warmth in you. Keep it. Aldric was quiet for a moment. Then he took the brooch from her hand carefully, as if he understood what he was being trusted with. I'll keep it, he said. Good, said Maren. And that was that. The morning was cold, but clear. The road looked different in daylight, shorter, somehow, and less threatening. The trees were bare and silver, and the sky above them was the particular pale blue of late autumn that looks almost too clean to be real. Solen walked with his arm out, and Maren walked beside him with her hand on it, and for a long while neither of them spoke. Eventually she said, "He was a good man." "Yes," Solen agreed. "Not everyone would have done that." "No." She was quiet again. Then, "I want to note, for the record, that I was prepared to sleep under a tree." "I know. I wasn't afraid." "I know that too. I simply would have preferred not to." She paused. "My joints." "I know, grandmother." She patted his arm. They walked. The town of Dernwick appeared in the late morning, first as a smudge of chimney smoke, then as rooftops, then as a gate in a low stone wall with people going in and out of it. Real people. Noise and market smell and voices. Solen felt something unclench in his chest that he hadn't fully noticed was clenched. "You should look in the bag," his grandmother said. "The one Aldric gave us." "Is there another one?" He opened the canvas bag as they walked. Bread as promised. Dried apple. Hard cheese. And at the bottom, wrapped in a separate piece of cloth, a small amount of money. Not a lot. What looked like a few weeks' egg money, maybe, but carefully set aside. Put in deliberately. Solen stopped walking. "Keep moving," his grandmother said. "He put money in." "I know. I suspected he would." "Keep moving, people are watching." He kept moving. He tucked the cloth back in and closed the bag and did not say anything for a moment because he didn't trust his voice entirely. "You knew," he said eventually. "He was counting his coins last night before he went upstairs," Maren said. "I heard it. I have good hearing." "Why didn't you say?" "Because if I had, you might have refused it, and you shouldn't. We need it." She looked ahead. There is no shame in accepting help from a good person. There is only the obligation to remember it, and to do the same, when you can. Solen looked at the gate of Dernwick ahead of them. "We'll send him something from the city," he said. "We'll send him something proper," she agreed. They walked through the gate. The letter arrived at Aldric's farmhouse on a gray February morning, delivered by a courier who had clearly ridden from somewhere far enough away that she was grateful for the water Aldric offered. The letter was on good paper. The handwriting was neat and formal. To Aldric of the Ashinvale Road. "My name is Solen of Velarath, though I am now of Dernwick too, I suppose. You may remember us. We knocked on your door in November. I hope this letter finds you in good health and the farm well ahead of spring. We reached my grandmother's cousin without further incident. She is called Wren, and she has a house with 3 rooms and a garden that is rather overgrown and which my grandmother has been reorganizing with some intensity since we arrived. I believe she needed a project. The garden is very grateful. I have found work at the apothecary in town, who was looking for someone who knew plants. My grandmother's botanical texts, which she carried in her coat pockets and which survived the river when nothing else did, have been useful. I am learning the trade. It is honest work. Enclosed, please find return what you put in the bag, and a bit extra besides. My grandmother said to tell you the extra is not payment either. She said you would understand what it is. I think about the night we spent at your farm more than you might expect. Not only because it was warm, though it was, but because you opened the door. You could have not opened the door, and no one would have blamed you, and we would have managed somehow, the way people do. But you opened it. My grandmother says there are people who make the world smaller and people who make it larger. She said to tell you that you are the second kind. With genuine gratitude. Solen. P.S. My grandmother also said to tell you that the elderberry drink was very good, and she would like the method if you're willing to share it. She has already begun growing elderberry in Wren's garden. She did not ask me to include this, but I included anyway, because I thought you might like to know. Aldric read the letter twice. Then he went to the shelf where he kept small things that mattered. A photograph of his wife, a drawing his daughter had sent of his grandchildren, a stone from the river that had some color in it, and he set the letter there. He touched the silver brooch beside it. He stood there for a moment, in his kitchen, with the fire going and the cat at his feet and the winter quiet around the house. Then he went and got a piece of paper and wrote back. The elderberry method is simple enough. You want them dried, not fresh. Fresh will make it too strong. 2 handfuls to a pot of water, low heat for a long time, no rushing it. A bit of honey at the end. My mother always said the patience was the ingredient. I imagine your grandmother already knows that. Tell her the garden sounds like good work. The farm is fine. Spring is coming. Aldric.